the question is, why do you think Donald Trump won the 2016 US election, and how do you think he will go in 2020? Can I throw to you first, Gareth?
Well, the good thing is at least we've started this with a nice, simple question. That's good.
Ease our way into it.
Yeah. There are multiple answers to that. The first thing that popped in my head besides Russia, was actually the narrative that the right had created around Barack Obama. The narrative of him being this, secret Muslim socialist who was, being placed into the presidency to bring down America. That played surprisingly well across the states with a lot of people, especially a lot of the far right Christian people. And that's sort of that conspiratorial thinking played very well for Trump, because Trump is very conspiratorially minded anyway. And he basically rode into politics on the birther movement. That is just such a ridiculous racist trope. And
he was the figurehead behind it, wasn't he?
Exactly right. Yeah, he was the main driving force. And that was pretty much how he wedged his way into it, how he sort of pushed his way into the political the scene back in 2015. And he will say now that, he actually came out recently and said the best day of his life was the day before he decided to run in 2015. But he's wanted to run for a long time.
Yeah.
He's been talking about it. There's interviews with him on Oprah. And so he's used that. So there's that. You can't go past Russia. You just can't. Russia didn't. It's not like Russia and Trump got together and said, let's do this. They were looking for a person to promote, and it just happened.
No collusion.
Yeah, well, it wasn't so much collusion. It was just they were running side by side very closely.
Yeah, parallel operations.
Yeah, parallel operations. Exactly right. And so that tipped it. You cannot say Russia didn't help Donald Trump. And Ollie and I have covered this extensively over the years, but we did one really big podcast. I think it was in series 3. That by the end of that podcast, all the research we'd done, I was just like, anybody who says to me Russia didn't have an influence in 2016 and didn't side with Trump to help Trump is just it's kind of like, I don't want to talk to you anymore, because it's such a ridiculous comment, because there's so much evidence. And I understand the Mueller report didn't connect it all, but Trump destroyed thousands of documents. People lied. People, everything you could possibly do to obstruct an investigation, they did that. And this is the result, and then on and on and on. I'm going to take up too much time talking about this. I'm going to pass over to
Ollie. You've taken that question very seriously, Gareth. I was going to be a bit more facetious and say that it's the Electoral College's fault. And Hillary Clinton actually won. If it had been a genuine popular vote, we wouldn't be here, I suppose.
Yeah. It's interesting on the Russia thing. I think that I get the feeling that you're absolutely right. I mean, look, if you can't start the conversation without at least agreeing that there was some international influence there. But it just strikes like, now that we've really seen Donald Trump in action, it's for me, it's like he's just. I don't want to use the word dumb, but he's certainly not. He's not socially savvy enough to have pulled off he was meant to pretend that he wasn't really good friends with Vladimir Putin, and he just couldn't pull that off. He just couldn't. No. He was just like, he just went to way too extreme, and I'd love to know what went through Vladimir Putin's head, just being like, he just can't manage faking that this didn't happen, But anyway, and I totally agree with you. I think the thing with the Electoral College is that, I wonder how much people didn't like the Electoral College before Donald Trump was elected. Like when people get elected.
Well, there was still Bush.
Yeah.
There was still Bush v. Gore.
I'd like to know the percentage of people who sort of, when Barack Obama gets voted in, whether they were still against the Electoral College, whether they were just like, no, it's still rubbish sort of thing. It took me,
In Obama's defense, I'm pretty sure he did win the popular vote both times as well. So,
that's interesting, isn't it?
Well, I wonder whether you guys could talk to the premise of disenfranchisement and whether, because we have an election in the US coming up in less than 6 months. So
Oh, no, it's like
it's probably
November.
4 or 5 months away.
No, November.
Yeah.
November. Yeah.
Yeah. So in terms of disenfranchisement, I mean, what we saw in 2016 was record numbers of low voting, right across the US. Are we likely to see that again in 2020, or do you think that Trump has done enough to polarize the people who are affected by the litany of things that have occurred since his
from Tara Reid of sexual assault against Biden? Seriously, you have to take it seriously. But not to minimize it at all, but to compare it to Trump's decades-long, accusations of rape, sexual assault, all those kind of different things. It's almost like he's created this such a giant, monstrous force that anything else in comparison is just dwarfed. So that's why I think a lot of the Biden sexual assault allegations from Tara Reid, it didn't really gain traction. Now, of course, there was a lot going on in the country there at the time, Ukraine, then coronavirus, all that kind of stuff. But it just didn't seem like it's almost like people would be like, okay, well, this happened once with Biden, and we can't excuse that. But compared to that guy, that's nothing. Yeah.
It's one of those things too, because you think, there's so little consequence for Trump's actions and what he's been accused of doing, to the point where he's been impeached, and you think, well, maybe I'm the crazy one. Maybe he's actually like this really good guy, right? And then you think about his social circle and the people who have gone to jail for him or because of things that they're lying to the FBI, that sort of thing. Like, who is there? There's like Michael Cohen and this who's Stone. All these.
He's not in prison anymore.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
But I guess
he was so excellent that he was able to manipulate his way out of prison because he knows a guy.
Well, yeah. I mean,
the same guy that we're discussing.
You can't let a man who wears a top hat like that into jail for too long, can you? They've got to be released into the public. Now, look, the thing there is, if I think about me and my friends, right? And I think, gosh, if that many of my friends were going to jail for federal offenses, I'd be like, gosh, I might be doing something wrong here. His social circle is so inclined to be corrupt that it seems like he's made a terrible mistake with making some of the friends that he's made, or he's just very very corrupt himself.
Well, you've got to look at Trump as sort of a mob boss. That's the way you got to look at him. The way that he operates, the way that he would say to his lawyers, "Why are you taking notes? Don't take notes." Because there'll be no official record, and he can just say whatever he wants, and that's it. And then he says so many different things that, Ollie and I were discussing this once on the podcast. Trump says so many different variations of the one event over a certain amount of time that no matter what happens, no matter what the outcome is, you can go and cherry pick all these different comments and create a narrative that leads to that conclusion.
Yeah,
and that's part of his strategy. He's not dumb in the sense that. Like, he knows what he's doing. He knows he's creating this fog of uncertainty, but he's doing it deliberately so he can create this narrative. No matter what happens, it could be a bad result for him or a good result. It doesn't matter. He's created a narrative that he is always the one who comes out on top. And then he's just shameless. He just will push whatever he needs to push to make himself the center of attention and the one who is always seeming like he's the victor. He's just completely without shame. So it's the worst elements of a politician. And just in one person, everything you don't want in a politician, that is Donald Trump.
Yeah, and I was chatting to my wife about this last night, and I said, it's like he was obviously not a great, like a naturally born leader, and so. But there was this sense that, hey, America's actually ticking along okay with him as president, like nothing was going wrong. Everything was kind of okay. Apparently the economy was doing quite well. Employment was quite good. The stock market was quite good. And you're like, hey, maybe they'll actually fluke this and pull this off. But then things really heated up, right? You've got coronavirus, and you've got a Black Lives Matter protest. You've got violent protests, and people obviously committing violent crimes from the left there as well. Not a lot, but certainly happening. And I suppose my point there is just that it was a trigger for these apocalyptical scenes that we're seeing on the news. And now is the test of a real leader, right? Now is a test of when to bring everyone together, and he can't do that, can he? What do you think? That's my vibe. is that he's fluked it for this long, and now it's a real situation. Yesterday he came out and said that they're going to have a great plan to deal with coronavirus, a beautiful plan, a great plan to deal with coronavirus. And I'm like, what?
You're about 6 months too late, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. Ollie,
your toad's going to tackle it.
Ollie,
he's a ridiculous man. He is a completely ridiculous man.
Yeah.
But it stands to his history and business dealings and everything else that he operates in such a way that everything is disposable. And for a man who's been bankrupt more than once, I think that illustrates his approach, which is use up every avenue and exhaust everything, and then throw it all away and start again when it gets too hard. But you can't do that with a nation state. You can't do that with the world's hegemonic power. You can't do that with that famous constitution of checks and balances. It just doesn't work. And it's a series of crises that are governance crises. And Donald Trump is not a man that is naturally inclined towards good governance. He couldn't work with a friendly Congress. You remember the first 2 years of his presidency, the Republicans had a majority in the Senate and the House, and they still couldn't repeal Obamacare. 2 years they couldn't repeal Obamacare. In that context, is it a surprise that he can't manage something like coronavirus or the Black Lives Matter movement? No, I don't think so.
Yeah.
Will it get better between now and the election in November? I just don't have any faith that that'll happen, as upsetting as that is.
That does, raise an interesting question, because the running of a country, the running of a government is, I suppose, fundamentally different, albeit, in some ways similar to the running of a multinational corporation. In a multinational corporation, you can have a CEO that pulls all of the strings and gets all of the executives for all of the different departments or other companies in line in order to run a particular strategy. Whereas in a government, each of those individual departments, each of those individual branches of the government have their own opinions, have their own strategies, and they're not all working towards a singular, nationwide goal. However, you have something like coronavirus, which is an, all hands on deck kind of situation where you absolutely can have, those so-called come to Jesus moments where you do, you can congregate around a single strategy of, suppression or eradication, just to use Australia's, grappling with that particular thing at the moment. Which one do we go with? But it's so interesting that he has taken that command and control type of strategy to his governance in that he doesn't seem to want to work with any of the branches of government. He doesn't seem to want to work with advisors. He had his
Fauci.
He had Fauci. The very popular Fauci
they've run a full-blown campaign against him.
Exactly. Yeah, it's just so funny that he
they didn't. According to him, no, they didn't.
It's just so funny, though. He seems to be so, such a populist individual, such a narcissist that, no other opinions, no other thoughts, no other stratagem can exist in that vacuum outside of Donald Trump's head. It's just such an interesting thing.
Yeah. Well, you've hit the nail on the head. That's exactly right. The turn against Fauci was an inevitability, really, especially when Fauci started talking about how, started criticizing the plan to open schools again or open businesses again. That was always going to turn because he was a strong opinion sometimes against Trump. But you're absolutely right. The narcissism of Trump means that there's no oxygen in the room for anybody else. It has to be Trump. And Trump has to be seen as a leader. And as we've clearly, as has been clearly demonstrated with coronavirus and the BLM movement, is that there's no leadership there. There's no overarching leadership. And, the United States is unique in the sense that, 50 states split into basically 50 small countries that all have their own ways of doing. But you could still have a very strong president and very strong administration directing where everybody goes. You'll have people who say, no, I'm not going to do that. No, I'm not going to do that. But it's top down. Leadership is top down. And good leadership in a country like that is very much top down. And it's completely lacking. Trump behind closed doors is whinging about how the coronavirus is hurting him. He's not concerned about anybody else. It's just about how it's hurting his polls. So that narcissism is exactly the right word to use. That narcissism means there's no oxygen in the room for anything else but him.
Yeah, there's a real like it's narcissism mixed with just a complete lack of empathy and overall intelligence too. My favorite moment over the last week has been when he's having this interview. I forget what it was on. It might have been on Fox. I don't know. But anyway, and he's got that reporter there, and the country is in the grip of a pandemic. They've got the Black Lives Matter movement. He's got the secret police kidnapping people from Portland into blank minivans, and he's there on the television saying that he did that cognitive test where he was able to remember the 5 words, which were person, woman, man, camera, TV. And I just watching the reporter looking at Donald Trump and just trying to grapple with the conversation that they were having and the reality that was happening.
Yeah.
It was so it was just heartbreaking, and he said it over and over again. And I've made an effort to try and remember it myself because I'm like, oh my god, maybe I'll struggle to remember these 5 words. But it's been pretty easy. I think my 5-year-old daughter's all over it as well.
I don't doubt the difficulty of the position of being president of the United States, but it's got to be a thankless job. But there needs to be a sense of empathy. I mean, empathy when it comes to leadership is absolutely essential. You need to care for the people that you are governing. Empathy as a personal trait is I've said this multiple times. In private conversations, empathy to me is probably the most attractive trait, and because it's putting yourself in another person's shoes. That has to be there for any kind of leader. That has to be, and that's why I said previously before, one of the reasons we started Stupid Political News is because there's people in power. Power is a very specific thing, but there's so many people in positions of power who don't know how to use that. And Trump is a perfect example of that. He doesn't understand how to wield power properly.